Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So today's question is on Indian economy and it is specifically related to the startups in the country. If you look at the different reports published by different entities, like for example NASSCOM has come up with a report which says that India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. So in this context, a question has been framed on startups. The government has been trying to boost startups for quite some time, and several policies have been evolved in order to boost these startups. Now, before I talk about the question as such, why do we need these startups? Why did we come up with this sudden emphasis on the startup ecosystem? This is because of the demographic dividend India is going through. इसमें क्या होता है, you have a large working age population. In fact, the average age of a country is less than 33 years, and if I'm not wrong, it should be around 29.5. Okay, so this is a pretty young age for a working population. So there are a lot of people who seek employment. In fact, if you look at the statistics, around 1 million workforce is added per month. Such a huge amount of workforce is added per month, and it is really difficult for a government or a private enterprise or a group of private enterprises in general to create employment for all of these things, all of these people who are getting added onto the ecosystem. So what are we trying to do is to come up with startups which will provide employment. Startups have the possibility to provide employment. They also provide the platform for self-employment and so on. That is why we are boosting these startups, and for this we have several policies like Startup India scheme, Stand Up India scheme. Previously we used to have Mudra Yojana, now it is merged into something else. So there are a lot of steps that have been taken in this regard. We will look into all of these things, but the basic reason why we are boosting startups is to harness the demographic dividend, is to reap the demographic dividend. Okay, so now we will move on to read the question, and then I'll evolve the usual introduction, body and conclusion format. So first let me erase all these things that I've written. Yes, so I should be evolving the introduction, body and the conclusion format for this question. Before I do that, I'll read out the question and then I'll talk about the prerequisites. I haven't talked about the prerequisites yet. I'll talk about the prerequisites. We'll give one or two important prerequisites that are important for an economics based question. One is the usage of keywords, the right kind of keywords like demographic dividend, startup ecosystem में क्या क्या words use हो जाते हैं, incubators, research parks and all these things which are related to startups and are economics based terms. All these things get included. And in addition to this, the usage of schemes is really important. The schemes, policies and reports, these things are really important when you make an economics based answer. Now I'll read out the question for you all. The question is the following: regional and structural irregularities in the India startup ecosystem should be plugged with suitable policy and implementation level measures. So basically he's trying to tell us that there are irregularities. What kind of irregularities? We have two kinds of irregularities. One is the regional, the other is the structural. And next we have to tackle it through several measures. The measures are also twofold, which he himself has talked about. One is the policy measures and the other is the implementation measures. So overall it seems to be the case that I have four subheadings: 1A, B, C and D. अब क्या होता है, usually we do not have a substantial number of points under each of these subheadings. So what we do is we try to merge subheadings. You could merge either these two subheadings or these two subheadings in order to come up with a well-rounded answer. Only if you don't have the points. If you have at least 3 points under each of the subheadings, it would be wise to write those subheadings and write the points. Okay, so what we have seen so far, we've seen that the body of the answer will consist in the following manner, will be framed in the following manner. First, we're going to talk about the irregularities. There are regional irregularities, and then there are structural irregularities, and in order to solve them, we need to come up with measures which are both based measures and the other implementation based measures. And how do we introduce the answer? We introduce the answer by fact based introduction. We could talk about how NASCOM report says that India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, or we could talk about the ways in which the government is trying to boost the startups. Recently, the government has taken so and so steps like Startup India, Stand Up India, so on and so forth, in order to boost the stand up ecosystem. In this context, we will see the irregularities and so on. That is one way to introduce your answer. But if you use this approach to start your answer, what happens is you won't have enough points to talk about the measures, because in measures under the subheading of policies वो schemes ही तो लिखना है. That is where you're supposed to write stand up India, startup India, etc., right? So if you use them, if you exhaust them in your introduction itself, it will be difficult for you to do so in the end. So I want you all to prioritize the points. The trick is not just to write points, you also have to write the points in the right space and in the right kind of flow. That is what we have to inculcate. So we've seen the introduction, body and conclusion, and now we will move forward and evaluate a sample answer. So this is how he begins the answer. He says that NASCOM report says India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. So that is where he is creating an impression. Good. But what else has he has written? He says that startups have created 60,000 jobs in 2019 alone. So startups alone have created so many jobs. They have the potential to create a lot of jobs. In fact, startups are one of the tools to heap the demographic dividend. ठीक है, all the workforce that is created these days, 1 million per month, all these people will not be given employment by startups itself, but startups have a capacity to absorb these workforce. That is what he's trying to say. Good. Now there is structural irregularities. What are the structural irregularities? By the way, before we talk about structural irregularities, we will spend some time on understanding the differences between structural and regional irregularities. Regional irregularities may, it is basically fairly straightforward. Whatever happens in one region is different from the other region. For example, in the Northeast India, the kind of startups we have are different from the startups we have in Bengaluru or Hyderabad. Hyderabad and Bangalore are mostly focused on IT startups. In Northeast India, we have agricultural startups and so on. So there is regional variation. And if you take areas which are insurgency hit or left wing extremism से हिट एरियाज जो है उन वहाँ का स्टार्टअप्स आर डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द स्टार्टअप्स फ्रॉम द रेस्ट ऑफ द कंट्री. सो देयर आर रीजनल वेरिएशंस. व्हाट आर स्ट्रक्चरल इरेगुलरिटीज? स्ट्रक्चरल इरेगुलरिटीज include the basic fundamental problems in the startup ecosystem, like for example glass ceiling for women and marginalized. This is basically a structural problem. Startup is basically a secular space. It is a gender secular space. Everybody should have the same opportunity to be a founder of the startup, or be a participant in the startup, or be an employee in the startup. But if there is some kind of ceiling, some kind of barrier, visible or invisible, then it is going to be a irregularity, and it is a structural problem. And if there are problems with access to funding, like for example, the government is coming with so many schemes in order to solve the problem of funding for startups, but the startups at the ground level are not able to get that money. So there are some structural problems which are preventing the money flow from the government to the end consumer. Who is the end consumer here? The startup. Okay, so these are the structural problems. Structural problems are related to the structure or the set of systems that are available and how well they are functioning there, how well they are functioning. And regional irregularities include the variations in the region. So what are the structural irregularities? Startup founders have technical knowledge because they usually have an idea, they want to capitalize on the idea, so they want to set up a startup on that. But to move that startup, in order to take forward that startup, you need business knowledge, and these people lack that business knowledge. So that is one structural problem. The other is the tax policy. The tax policy is not startup friendly. There is poor clarity on the applicability of GST to startups. Also, there are problems on angel tax. Like for example, angel is someone who funds the startup, and the angel tax is basically the tax that is levied on these funds. That is one point. And secondly, venture capitals, what kind of tax policy norms do we have for venture capitals vis-a-vis startups? They are also difficult. So basically the tax policy in relation to startup is not up to the mark. When this tax policy is not up to the mark, it will be really difficult for the startup to survive, because because its costs will be high, whereas its returns will be low. Okay, so that has to be sorted. And then you have complicated exit system. Suppose manlo the startup is not doing well, I want to exit. I should be able to sell off my assets and give some money for my sustenance and maybe for my future endeavors, but that is not possible in the present scenario. That is not possible in the sense there are systems that are there in order to make that possible, but it is not so easy. So once I get into the startup ecosystem, it is really difficult for me to get out. So that is what he is trying to say, that is a structural problem. And then you have poor access to funding, and then you have glass ceiling. Glass ceiling is basically that which is faced by women, marginalized and so on. It is usually in relation to women, but yahan to he also linked it to the marginalized. And then some of them are being set up as shell companies for ulterior motives. What ulterior motives? Like it could be political funding, or it could be political funding, or round tripping of money and so on. For all these purposes, startups can be set up. So he has pointed out a good number of problems, good number of structural irregularities in the system. Now he has to point out regional irregularities. Let's see what they are. Most startups are from urban areas. Okay. Northeast region and left-wing extremism states have poor startup ecosystem. Okay. Within rich states themselves, even if you have a rich state like Maharashtra, etc., within that state itself there are irregularities. Like for example, Marathwada has poor startup ecosystem, while Mumbai is rich in a startup ecosystem. So there are variations within the state itself. And in addition to that, information technology and AI startups. AI means artificial intelligence. He's supposed to have explained this. So they are focused more on Bengaluru and Hyderabad, which we have talked about at the some time ago. So these startups are not uniformly dispersed all over the country. Of course, the truth is we don't need to have this kind of uniform dispersal throughout the country, because different areas have different kinds of expertise. For example, Hyderabad and Bangalore, they are basically known for the workforce. They are known for the IT employees and the colleges. So वहाँ से कॉलेज से सीधा निकल के गोइंग इनटू द स्टार्टअप एंड बीइंग एम्प्लॉयड इन द स्टार्टअप is what is logically feasible. Like for example, if you take the case of Northeast, people are mostly culture driven. So culture based products, culture based startups, maybe creating some kind of handicraft, some kind of ethnic products, etc. If you create those kind of startups in Northeast area, that is going to be helpful for them. So region specific startups have to evolve. That is what we have to keep in mind. So this point may not be relevant, because Bengaluru and Hyderabad of course have concentration of information technology startups, but that is the way, because these are the areas where we have work, we have skilled manpower, we have colleges and so on. Okay, so this point is not so relevant, but it is fine. He has overall established the regional variation of startups in the country. Now he has to talk about the measures. It's a good thing he has segregated the measures into policy wise measures and implementation measures. The policy measures may he is mentioning the scheme. He is talking about stand up India scheme. He gave the essence: women of SC and ST entrepreneurs, Startup India for boosting startups, Mudra for decreasing the cost of loan, Stand Up India Hub to act as a single point of contact for startups. This is basically Startup India Hub, not Stand Up India Hub. Okay, and then you have exemption from certain labor laws, and in fact, you also have exemption from environmental laws. This was a recent amendment that has been made. In fact, not so recent. It was done in 2016, towards the end of 2016, if I remember rightly. So, see, startups were also given certain kind of exemptions. So, when these exemptions are given, when this policy support is being given to startup, it would be easy for the startup to flourish. And in terms of implementation of the schemes, and in terms of implementation of the various policy measures that are supposed to boost the startups, what are the changes that we have to make? One, we have to make it easy for them to file patents, and in addition to that, we are taking so many steps to boost startups. So we have to track the progress, and once you track the progress, you will be able to course correct. And in case of certain startups, in the first point in the previous subheading, we have seen that the startup founders usually have technical knowledge but not business knowledge. So in this context, what we are supposed to do is to basically support them This is what is meant by hand holding. And next to that, we have faster exit and easy entry norms. So these are the ways in which you can boost the startup ecosystem. I want you all to notice how he has written 5 points here, 4 points here. So overall, this is a content dense answer. He has written a lot of these things, a lot of points under this. Some of them are relevant, some of them are not relevant, some of them are relevant, some of them are not so good, like this point. But otherwise, he has done well. Let's see what the conclusion is. Resolving irregularities of startup ecosystem can solve unemployment, increase prosperity. They can create a virtuous cycle of growth. This is a keyword. So this seems to be a decent conclusion. So the overall answer seems to be good. The overall answer, in fact, is a content dense answer. It may not be possible to write so many points under each of your side headings, but the idea is to evolve these kind of subheadings and evolve these kind of points, and you will do so in due course of time. As and when you keep practicing and keep building content, no, you will keep getting these points. It is easy to generate these points. It's just a matter of revision. So that should be the discussion for the day. I'll meet you all tomorrow. Thank you for your participation. Bye.